Okay, we're going to start at the front of the machine. Firstly, the feeder house is connected to the front of the adapter. A great place to check is your lock. The lock is held in place with 3 large nuts down here that are well worth glancing at on a daily basis. Check the lock is in position, check it's tight, and make sure the hook is well locked on to the bottom of the MacDon. Whilst you're in here, especially on nice new machines, look at paint. Keep your eye on the feeder faceplate lock bolts. 1 here, 1 there, and then 5 on this upper location. Just make sure they haven't moved in the course of operation. Whilst you're in here, check the PTO on the front of the feeder drive. Make sure the PTO is well connected, make sure it hasn't come loose, and make sure that it seems to still occupy all its structural integrity. There's a sight gauge on the back of the lower feeder drive. That feeder drive box has a sight gauge in it and uses Hytran Axial. On the side of the feeder house, we can see the feeder tensioner. Feeder tensioner is a 24mm nut, easy to do, and has a sight gauge on the outside for you to know where you're going to. The top of the feeder house has an access cover port here. It's easy to remove and it does keep the top of the feeder house clean, but be careful, once it's running, no one should be standing on top of the feeder. Whilst you're down here, if your machine comes with a stone trap, it will be mounted on the back of the top of the broad elevator. Okay, the stone trap only works well if you're going to empty it. Okay, it will fill up with dirt and with debris on a daily basis, and if it's full of dirt and debris, you're not going to be able to get the rock in it. So empty the stone trap as a matter of course multiple times a day as you get out, especially if the fields are dirty. Whilst you're down here, always a good idea, inspect the pins that support the bottom of the broad elevator. Those pins have a locking nut in them. Make sure the nut is good, make sure the pins are in. Also, whilst you're in here, you can see the top of the front axle. The top of the front axle, and you can see the cage that protects the bottom of the final drive and the transmission. These are areas of residue build-up. Top of the front axle, left axle front, right axle front, on top of the gearbox and in that cage. It's a great place to focus when you're cleaning the machine. You can also see up here the drain port for the aircon. It's got a little rubber nipple on the end of it. It's a great thing to clean just as you come through on the morning. Give it a little pinch, make sure it's not clogged up with dirt. It'll keep the cab smelling sweeter for longer. Okay, so you've got your rock trap, remember to empty it. You've got your pins, your main hydraulic rams, make sure that they're well fitted and that the rams are there. You've got debris locations, make sure you give it a good clean. Pulling back from there, we're going to the top of the broad elevator. Top of the broad elevator has what we lovingly term the Mickey Mouse gearbox. The Mickey Mouse gearbox, the top broad elevator sprocket drive, has again got a sight gauge on it. It has a decal which requests that you do the measurement when it's at a low level. Always check it with the feeder on the ground. Okay, there's also technically up the top here, there's a crunch point. Always monitor the looms and the hydraulics as they go across the feeder house. This location moves up and down multiple times a day. Make sure that the looms are in good condition and well mounted, and that the hydraulic hoses coming down here to feed the reel are in good condition. There is obviously excellent inspection hatches on the top of the broad elevator, that large one for the rear sprocket and these 2 small ones here for the mid positions on the broad elevator. They're easy to get to, they've got a captive nut on the back of them, they're a 13mm bolt. Take them off, have a look inside, understand what your top of your broad elevator looks like, alright? It's very good for giving you access if you've accidentally swallowed something. On the underside of the cab, you can also see the forward rotor bearing. It's a 600-hour grease point. Don't worry about getting to it on a regular basis. It has a remote line to the side of the machine so you can get to it. Alright, so we're going to move backwards now on the machine from the broad elevator. Things to keep your mind on. If you see nuts and bolts moving, componentry is moving. Keep your eye on it. Keep the feeder chain tensioned. It will keep it quieter, it will run for longer, it will have lower wear rates, and you'll get a better result. The rule of thumb for the broad elevator chain is that the third slat back from the bottom sprocket should be just contacting the pan. Remember, if you've got a feeder chain that's too tight, you will not be able to feed with high capacity. You'll want it to have some flex in it so that when you put large bulky amounts of product up the feeder house, the chain can bow in a convex as opposed to a concave. All right, moving on. We've inspected our sight gauges, we've inspected our feeder chain tension, we've inspected our faceplate connections, we've even looked inside the top covers to inspect our broad elevator. We've checked for debris on the top axle, we've looked at the caging around the transmission, and coming to the rear side here, you can then inspect the transmission and the final drives from the other side. There is a cage opening in the bottom side which allows you to get in there. There's just clips on the inside which allow you to get in. Make sure you check the transmission for debris and keep the cage on, it gives good protection. As we're moving around the side of the machine, we get to our fan. Our fan cover has an excellent inspection hatch, one lever, and the bottom of the fan is empty. That allows you to empty the fan if there's any product getting in there. The fan's hydraulically driven, it's a continuous cross-flow fan painted by Case IH, exceptionally good at removing weed seeds from samples. It's a great fan, and due to the cross-flow design, you get no waving in the airflow. It's a continuous airflow as opposed to as each baffle in the fan passes, you get a surge of air. Moving up on the side of the machine, we see our main feeder drive. Okay, it's got two grease nipples on the back of here. These grease nipples are 100 hours, one at the front and one at the back. As you come across here, you see the cab air filter and you see hydraulics down the side of the machine. Underneath here, we have our bubble up auger, our vertical elbow into the unloading auger. We've got an inspection hatch here. When you get going at the start of the season, just make sure it's closed, as you do with the back of the inspection hatch. Also, if for some reason you're washing your machine or you have to leave it outside and it rains, make sure you empty that because rainwater will sit in it. We can clearly see our unloading system on the left side. We've got a 19mm nut on our tensioner with a sight gauge. Our controllable bed augers on the Case IH Axial flow give us the ability to unload the auger whilst stopping the bed augers inside the box. Our 14,400 litre box on this 8250 gives exceptional capacity in field and reduces unloading times. As we keep going, the main drive shaft down to the feeder, nice, simple, clean, not rows of belts, not rows of pulleys. One thing I would request is as you pass by here, the mounting frame, just monitor the nuts. Make sure there's no movement in this assembly because there's a lot of drive being driven down here to run large scale fronts. As we move forward here, we get to the left hand side, we're at the shaker. The main shaker flywheel. This nut here, monitor it. Make sure it's embedded nicely and stable, probably worth a bit of a dash with a paint pen. On the side you've got your main sieve shaker bearing. If they're greasable, make sure you grease them. If they're non-greasable, get them monitored by your service team. You can also see the main hydrostatic hose drives coming down from the pumps to the drives. Just make sure that they're nicely mounted on the side and that there's no chance for them to chafe. Keep an eye on the hydraulic hosing. Monitor it, inspect it. The more you look at it, the more likely you are to find hoses that are chafing or that they're rubbing on looms. As we come down the side of the machine, there is a grease nipple. 100 hours. Just under here for the shaker. Okay? Just here. Okay? It's easy to get to. This cover can be removed, but it's just as easy to get an extendable grease gun and you'll be able to get to it easily. If for any reason you find your unloader won't work, there's shear bolts. There's one there and there's one there. If those shear bolts blow, there's spares in the frame here. That's the only reason your unloader won't work. The shear bolt has blown. But trust me, 13 years, never blown a shear bolt. So I would be surprised if it would be a common thing for you. Your main drive. This machine is fitted with a 24 blade standard chopper with retractable knives. The lever for the knives is mounted just on the back side of here, next to the rotor gearbox selector. The rotor gearbox selector has 3 gears. Obviously you're going to be using your high speed gears in your cereals and lower speed gears in your canola and in your lupins. We can see the 2 drives and they've got a nice simple clutch. It's a squeeze to close clutch. It's manual and honestly it's the one that I've come to like the most. You squeeze it, you rotate it, and you slide it across, and it goes into position. One position will give you a 3000 RPM from your chopper, the other one will give you 900 RPM. You can't run the knives in at 900, you can only run the knives in at 3000. 3000 with those knives in, there'll be nothing coming out the back except dust. In 900 RPM with the knives out, the straw will be so good you could bale it. Your battery box is mounted in here, where your batteries are mounted, your storage compartments in here with your inspection lights. There's lights on the inside of the machine, on the outside, and there's lights inside the chamber, controlled from the pins on the outside. You've got a nice slider on the outside of the machine just here. As you're coming down this side of the machine, again, inspect hosing. The electrical hosing, looming, where the final drives, hydrostats are coming in. And whilst you're here, again, sight gauges for the belts which drive the chopper. They're again 19mm bolts, and those 19mm bolts and nuts can be done quickly and easily because there's a sight gauge on the outside which makes for easy reference. You don't have to be the greatest combining mechanic to know to tighten that nut flush to where the sight gauge is. As you're coming inside the machine here, you get to the rear axle, the side of the sieve, again sieve looming. There's a lot of activity going on in the sieve. It's the whole of the active grain pan, the whole of the fan assembly, all on a tilting sieve. Gives you up to 12 degrees of flotation on the sides of hills, keeping even loading of the product at the rotor onto the sieve. Keep your eye on the looming, keep your eye on the bushes, and monitor the looming across the top of the back axle. The rear sieve actuator looms, the rear sieve sensor looms, and the auto steer looming on the back of the two steer rams. We'll keep moving around the back of the machine. Monitor your power zone. You can see it's clean, it's simple, it's all in one location, and it keeps the sides of the machine free, belts, pulleys, chains and sprockets. As we come around to the back of the machine, this machine's fitted with a 2019 C Terminator. We come to our spreaders. We've got a straw hood in here. The straw hood helps control the straw into our spreaders. To remove the spreaders quickly and easily, 1 click, 2 click, and the spreaders are out. It didn't take a lot of strength, and it's not difficult to do. Spreaders are controlled using manual adjustment. Always run them at maximum. There's 2 electrically controlled actuators on left and right for the maxing of the throw, and there's a central actuator which controls product flow to the middle of the machine and product flow to the left and right. I tend to open the middle one just a smidge to allow some product to fill the middle of the machine, but the majority of it you want it to fully extended baffles. The only amendment I would make to that is the left side. The left side is full, the right side I'd pull back 1 notch because it throws it away from the rear wheel of the machine. If you're turning into the wind and you can disengage the separator, the rear wheel, if this spreader is in a full position, some of it contacts with the rear of the wheel. Okay, continuing to move around, we can see our fuel tanks, plenty of capacity for full-size days and long nights. Okay, one of the most important areas of the combine is the air intake system. There's been a variety of different incarnations of this, and I'm very happy with what Case IH have settled on now. The rotary air screen has become a rotary wand. The rotary wand is driven using basic belts off a simple hydro motor, all of them embedded inside the outer door of the rad casing. On a daily basis, really simple checks for your rad casing. Open the door, look in the base of the rad chamber. Is there residue in there? If there's residue in there, is it small or large? If it's large, where did it come from? That's a worry. If there's large stuff getting inside to the rad box, then that's going to get to your filter and it's going to block it and cause you downtime. So look at what's in there, see if you can locate the sources of it. The most important bit of the rad box in my mind is the seal. I would check the seal on a daily basis. I would check it on a daily basis because I would be looking to see whether the seal is delaminating, whether it's crushed flat, or whether it's actually fallen away from the actual main frame of the manifold of the rad housing. Whilst I'm in here, there's an internal wand which goes round and round on the rad. It's more of a vent than it is to clean the rad, but there's a set of bearings in here. Now, you wouldn't want this to go wrong. It's also powered, so for a simple reason, just check that bearing in there. Give it a wobble in both directions. It may not tell you that it's going to fail in 4 hours, but at least it's not going to fail in the next couple of hours. Check that. Also, the internal vac has got rubber seals on it. Make sure that they're in good condition and well set. As you close the door, the vac on the outside of the rotary air screen, the rotary vac is actually powered using the separator. If you're going to turn the separator off, okay, the rotary air screen is going to stop turning around. The way I can tell it's a really good vacuum cleaner is because if you turn off the separator at the end of the row and you turn the combine round and you turn it into the chaff, it's going to stick to the fascia of the rotary screen, and if the separator is running, it keeps it spotless. So I'm very happy with the rotary vac. I think it's well driven, it's driven with belt, it's nicely run. I like the internal hydromotor that runs the internal vac. It's nice, it's simple, it's got a spring drive on it, and it's got a belt tension. Check your seal and check it all the way into the groove. If you can go all the way tight into here, there's a lot better access to the back edge of the seal now on current combines. Make sure that the seal is fluffed. Make sure the seal is not crushed and closed too much. Sometimes people think that the tighter you close the door, the better it seals. The tighter you close the door, the more you'll actually root the seal. Okay, and these rubber seals can get hot and they can get stuck closed. If they stuck closed, they're going to leave gaps. So when you get your door and you're setting it, just gently close it and feel the seal. Once you can feel the seal, and with the new catches, it's very easy to put just the right amount of pressure on the door. Don't tighten the clamps up so that they're closing it and crushing the seals. Okay, your air intake assembly. It's a manifold coming off the side of the radiator housing. It's a top seal, the aspirator, a bottom seal, a curved manifold into the filter with a venturi. This venturi hosing goes along the base of the back of the, actually this new one goes around the top of the radiator, and the venturi is mounted over here. That silver bulge in there. So the muffler is creating a venturi effect, which is causing the air filter to suck the air through. Don't bang the filters, okay? I'm a filter cleaner. Some people let them run until they're blocked and then clean them. I like to keep the engine running as cool as possible, and I think by blowing them out on a daily basis. I tend to blow them from the outside, from the inside out, but then I'll wipe the outside off. The housing. Not many people notice this. There's a top to the housing. Okay, there's a top to the housing, and there's actually a rubber seal inside the lid. So when you go to reapply the housing, make sure that the filter is well seated into the internals, that all the clips are in the out position, and that the top writing is at the top. Then when you do insert it, make sure that all the components are going into the correct parts. If you don't, you will crush the plastics, and when you crush the plastics, it folds them over and it causes a bad seal. The aspirator. If you get a blocked filter, it's almost pays to take the aspirator out and make sure it's clean. All right. The top seal and the bottom seal and this seal here, I tend to put Celastic in. All right. They now do come from C&H with a lovely rubber seal in it, and I think the rubber seal is doing a great job. You cannot just continue to tighten the Jubilee hose clamps. If you just continue to tighten the hose clamps, you will warp the plastic. The best way to tell if they're sealing nicely is to give it a bit of a push with your hip. If it moves radically in relation to the other parts, it's not sealing well. You can see a bad one because the two parts, they creak and move apart. So take it to bits, bead of Celastic, put it back together with a bead of Celastic on it. Always a great thing to do. Service points around the back of your FPT engine. Engine oil, green dipstick, right in the eye line, easy to reach. The rotor gearbox at the front right here, and your PTO box back left. Both of them, I like to double dip. I think you get a true sense, and some of these chambers cause vacuums. Make sure you double dip them. The alternator in here, a great place for keeping clean. Keep the air off, keep the dirt off the alternator when you clean it. Check the muffler on a daily basis. Look, watch the connectors on it. Over the top of the engine, behind here is the exhaust manifold. It's a great place for keeping clean. Get your compressed air in there on a daily basis. Make sure that the exhaust manifold is nice and clean. Another thing to do, keep your eye on the tensioners for the fan. There's actually a small tensioner just behind the alternator here. It again has a sight gauge on it, and it's a 19mm ratchet spanner. Always inspect the fan bearing. Inspect the rate, the fan, make sure it's nice and firm, make sure the belts are good, and have a good look at the tensioner and the idler. The better you inspect that, the better it will do. Okay, I don't have a problem with putting a screwdriver on all the air fittings on the air cleaner, whether they be coming from the other side or whether they're already there. There's another area that's not well worth checking when you get into these. Up on the top here, there's an access port. It shows you underneath the back of the engine. The back of the engine pan is sloped, so if there was a leak of any oil that you couldn't see and you looked down this hole, the oil would collect along the front of the pan and you'd be able to tell whether there was an oil leak that you hadn't been able to notice. Also, whilst you're up here, there's another tensioner behind the back of the muffler. That tensioner does the unloading, the bed auger unloader. Keep your eye on that tensioner, it too has a sight gauge. Whilst you're up in here, it's always well worth checking the looming to the GPS. It's exposed. You can see it comes off the top of the off the top of the receiver, comes down the front of the box, and it actually travels along underneath the back of the grain tank. All right, you've got excellent expansion ports here above the top of the bubble up order, above the top of the clean grain, and there's another one over here that's excellent for into the top of the rotor.